BBC are happy to expose anything or anyone that does not step in line with their views, so here are some facts about the corrupted BBC and how they spend your license fee. 1. The BBC and violence. BBC Macintyre undercover journalist James Raven, 20th of August 2004, found guilty of the murder of a man tortured to death in front of his children. During the BBC man's trial, it emerged that the £40,000-a-year journalist had tortured his victim to death in Cheshire, having tied up his children and forced them to watch. Brian Waters was beaten, whipped, burned and attacked with an industrial staple gun. He died after being hung upside down and sexually assaulted with a metal bar. BBC Panorama presenter and reporter Raphael Rowe. Rowe was himself convicted of murder and spent 12 years behind bars before being cleared after the appeal court ruled his conviction was unsafe. Rowe has a string of other convictions for robbery and theft, including one for malicious wounding. Soon after being released from prison, Rowe began training as a BBC journalist, and in September 2001 landed a job as an investigative reporter for Radio 4's Today programme. BBC TV and BBC Radio 4 broadcaster Lawrence Westgate, the 34-year-old BBC expert, flew into a rage, repeatedly punching his love rival in the face and fracturing his eye socket, a court was told. At one point, it was even thought he had bitten the other man's ear off. Westgate has appeared on TV and radio discussing the slave trade. In September 2009, Westgate was convicted of grievous bodily harm and given a 9-month jail sentence, suspended for 2 years. In 2000 he was given a community order after being found to have had sex with an underage girl. BBC TV News presenter Ashley Blake, Inside Out. In September 2009 he was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment after being convicted of assault. Blake scarred a 17-year-old for life after inflicting serious facial injuries with a wooden pole. As a result of the wounding trial, Blake's previous criminal record was revealed. He had been convicted of theft on 6 occasions, twice in 1986, 3 times in 1987 and once in 1993, and handling stolen goods in 1988. In 1988, Blake was found guilty of altering documents following a traffic collision, resulting in him being disqualified from driving, a ban he broke in 1990. Question: was the BBC aware of the serious criminal background of those it employed, or is the BBC's investigative journalism department incapable of investigating its own staff? Question: do you think the BBC in general and BBC Panorama in particular are in any position to distort and sensationalize relatively minor criminal convictions of small numbers of individuals and other organizations? 2. The BBC and illegal drugs. BBC Radio 1 DJ Groove Rider, real name Raymond Bingham, jailed for 4 years in Dubai after smuggling drugs into the United Arab Emirates in February 2008. BBC 999 Lifesavers star Natasha Collins and BBC presenter Mark Speight. Natasha Collins was found dead in a bath in 2008 due to a massive cocaine overdose. Boyfriend Mark Speight, a BBC presenter, was initially arrested on suspicion of murder and supplying Class A drugs. A few months later, Speight was reported missing and was found to have committed suicide by hanging himself near Paddington Station. BBC Europe correspondent Johnny Diamond. March 2008, the 38-year-old was detained by transport police at Vilnius Airport in Lithuania, after illegal drugs were found in his bag. Diamond, a radio and TV news reporter, is understood to have been on holiday alone in Lithuania. He was checking in for a flight to London when he was arrested. At a court hearing in the capital Vilnius, he pleaded guilty to carrying drugs and was fined £230 for possession. He told the court he bought them in a nightclub when he was drunk. A BBC spokesman said, "We are aware of the incident, which happened in his own time. He recognizes that he has been foolish." A BBC insider said it was not a sackable offence. It's likely that the BBC will speak to him about this, but it probably won't go any further. BBC Children's TV presenter Richard Bacon admitted to using Class A drugs after a Sunday newspaper described him as a cocaine-snorting sneak. currently working for BBC Radio 5. BBC TV star John Alfred, Casualty, convicted of supplying Class A drugs to the News of the World undercover reporter Mazhar Mahmood, and subsequently jailed for 9 months. Question: considering the culture of drug abuse seemingly epidemic at senior and middle levels of BBC staff, what drug testing measures are employed by the corporation? Question: has the BBC ever tested the toilet cubicles in its own buildings for evidence of cocaine use? Question: do you consider that the vital role that BBC staff play in imparting information to the British public makes it particularly important that BBC staff are not stupefied by narcotics whilst on duty? Question: how many other BBC staff have drug-related criminal convictions? Question: does the BBC have a moral obligation to ensure high standards among staff, especially in the light that their salaries and expenses are paid directly by the public? 3. The BBC and sexual depravity. BBC presenter Peter Rowell. On 22 April 2011, Avon and Somerset police announced that Rowell had been charged with 4 counts of indecent assault, dating back to the 1990s, and had been remanded in custody. In May 2011, Rowell was charged with 7 counts of possessing and making indecent images of children along with 7 counts of indecent assault against girls under the age of 16. On the 9th of June 2011, it was announced that Mr. Rowell would stand to face charges relating to a 5th victim, including rape of a minor. He appeared in North Avon Magistrates Court to face 3 new charges, 2 of indecent assault and 1 of rape against the 16-year-old victim. He was released on bail, having had a curfew imposed by the courts. He was also ordered to surrender his passport. He returned to court on June 24 for a plea hearing on these latest charges and was released on bail with conditions attached until October 2011. BBC producer Benjamin Wilkins, March 2010, secretly taped a series of sexual liaisons with TV and radio presenters using a hidden camera. He hid the CCTV device in a smoke alarm directly above his bed to record his encounters with a succession of 10 lovers. Another camera was hidden in a movable ornament in his bathroom. The cool and calculating broadcaster took the women back to his flat where he recorded them having sex with him. Many of them hold senior positions in television and radio, both presenting and in production roles, but cannot be named for legal reasons. One of his victims said he had left her feeling violated, sick and dirty. He was jailed for 8 months and was ordered to sign the sex offender register for 10 years after admitting 11 counts of voyeurism, including filming 5 women and setting up the cameras. BBC Sports producer Martin Smith, Match of the Day. 2009 London Southwark Court. Smith pleaded guilty to 14 sample counts of making indecent photographs of a child, on or before 2 April 2009. Sentencing Judge Andrew Goymer said some of the material was quite unspeakable and repulsive in the extreme. It involves serious sexual activity by adults with very young children indeed, and any decent person would be appalled by it. The court heard one of the victims was a baby under 12 months old being subjected to penetrative sex, another was 2 years old. All the images were of boys. He was given an 8-month prison sentence, suspended for 2 years and ordered to take part in an internet sex offenders treatment program. During the trial, the judge was handed a sheaf of character references, including some from fairly well-known names. Question: can you reveal the fairly well-known names within the BBC who offered to defend a man convicted of crimes involving the sexual abuse of a baby under 12 months old? Question: considering the access to children and vulnerable people that BBC staff enjoy, what checks do they make to ensure the safety of the public? How many BBC staff are currently on the sex offenders register or have been convicted of crimes of a sexual nature? 4. BBC Panorama and the Missing Millions. June 2009 BBC Panorama, IVF, undercover £900,000. Top IVF doctor, who is said to have helped mothers give birth to 2,300 babies in 7 years, accuses BBC Panorama program of making defamatory allegations. The BBC came to a settlement with the Egyptian-born doctor, with the corporation paying both sides legal bills estimated to be £900,000. October 2006 BBC Panorama, The Price of Blood, £1 million reported on an unsuccessful prosecution in Italy of Paolo and Guelfo Marcucci, the owners of the Marcucci group of companies, which included, at the time, the biopharmaceutical company Sclavospa. The program alleged that the Marcuccis had sold or distributed blood derivative products that were infected with HIV and hepatitis C, or which were likely to be infected. During a High Court hearing, the BBC accepted that the allegations were untrue and expressed regret that any impression was given to the contrary. The BBC apologized to the Marcuccis and agreed to pay substantial damages and their legal costs. May 1994 BBC Panorama, The Halcyon Nightmare, £4 million. The BBC lost another Panorama libel case against American drug company Upjohn. In his decision, Mr. Justice May stated, "The seriousness of the libels against Upjohn is in my judgment obvious and great." The multi-party action over the sleeping pill Halcyon took 65 days and is estimated to have generated total costs of £4 million. Last week one of the law chambers involved had to call in removal men to clear part of the paperwork. The program was edited by current BBC Director General Mark Thompson. October 1984 BBC Panorama, Maggie's Militant Tendency, £1 million. The program alleged that two Conservative Party figures were secret extremist Nazi supporters and was met with libel action against the BBC. The BBC capitulated on 21 October and paid the pair's legal costs from the publicly funded license fee. Both were awarded £20,000 each, and in the next edition of Panorama on 27 October, the BBC made an unreserved apology to both. The total cost of the trial, including the remedy awarded to the claimants, reached £1 million. Question: according to the BBC's charter, it must represent the interests of license fee payers and exercise rigorous stewardship of public money. Do you think that BBC Panorama complies with this regulation? 5. The BBC Deception and Fabrication of Evidence. June 2009 BBC Panorama, Young Gunman. BBC investigated by Merseyside police after allegations were made in Liverpool Crown Court that a teenager was paid money to pose with guns and ammunition for the programme. The cost of the investigation in terms of money and wasted police time remains unknown. February 2010 BBC Panorama, What Next for Craig? A Panorama programme distorted some known facts in a report on research into the treatment of children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Edit. The BBC Trust announced, the BBC Trust Editorial Standards Committee, ESC, partially upheld an appeal over complaint about BBC One's flagship current affairs show, titled What Next for Craig, which aired on 12 November 2007. An apology was broadcast during a future edition of Panorama, and the BBC's Deputy Director General Mark Bifford met with the committee to ensure the breaches of the editorial guidelines are not repeated. 6. BBC Panorama Duty of Balance and Impartiality. This is the third Panorama programme to focus on the British National Party in just 10 years. Question: considering the BBC's duty towards impartiality and balance, can you explain why a BBC Panorama investigation has never been conducted into the subversive and violent activities of the far left? Question: further to this, how does BBC Panorama defend commissioning Jerry Gable and Nick Lowles of the Communist Front Group Searchlight to assist with its programs, particularly in view of the extensive criminal records of key figures within the Searchlight operation and their long-term associates? 7. BBC Panorama investigation into the BBC. Question: considering the extensive evidence of violent and serious criminal convictions, drug abuse and sexual depravity, coupled with details of financial mismanagement and breaches of its charter, would Panorama consider an investigation into the BBC itself? Question: has such an investigative expose ever been considered, and if not, why not? 8. BBC Panorama journalistic integrity. Question: the BBC has a legal obligation to operate within the terms of its charter. Failure to do so constitutes a criminal offence.